All right, welcome back, everybody. We have been on a 2-week hiatus from Coffee with Coaches for the holidays. So we hope everybody had a great time with their loved ones. We had Christmas and New Year's and all the fun and all the joy that brings us. But Loretta, I don't know about you, but it's been a lonely couple Thursdays for me. So
For
um,
sure.
my voice is a little bit raspy. I'm kind of coming off of a sinus infection and laryngitis, but we're feeling good, still sounding a little rasp. So for anybody out there, if you get annoyed at my voice, don't worry. I'm not going to be talking a lot today because I know nothing about this subject. I know very little, besides that it is important to talk about. So I'm really excited to get Dr. Liesle's wisdom on everything that is pelvic floor health related. So I guess before we get into that, Loretta, do you want to share anything that's been going on the past 2 weeks? Anything you're excited about? Anything new?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, I want to say, yay, we found a topic that Reese doesn't know about. Woo! But yeah, no, I've been kind of just getting in and trying to get my miles, keep them decent this over break. I think that's something to think about. It was really important to me to spend time with my family while they were home. My kids only get to come home a few times a year. And so, balancing training and family is a little bit tricky, but I was able to get in a few miles with my daughter, which was nice, and still get that blend. Maybe my mileage wasn't as high as it normally is, but you know what? It's okay, right? I'm not losing a bunch of fitness in just a couple of weeks of them being home.
Yeah, that's good. That's a beautiful and a healthy way to look at the holidays too, as we can think about like, hey, like, are we getting all of our training miles or all of our training time or whatever it is? Or do we think like, hey, this is a time where, it's kind of nice to just give the body a little bit of rest, maybe recharge the batteries emotionally, with loved ones, and then crank away come January, February, and March for our summer races.
For sure. So one last thing before we get into this, Coach Reese is running Frozen Gnome 50K this weekend. We have a lot of Ornery Mule coaching athletes also running. I think I counted 9 athletes and 2 coaches. So that's going to be a fun day. And it looks like the course is going to be not so frozen, maybe.
Oh my gosh. Well, okay, so I think it's gonna be frozen. I just don't think it's
Okay.
gonna cold here now. So I mean, like relatively speaking, it's still warm. Like today's supposed to be over 30 degrees, and I think any day that's over 30 in January is like a warm day for sure. But I think race day is supposed to be like low of 28, high. But like I've had colder races in March of this previous year, 2023. So I mean, it's going to be great conditions. But I think the big thing with this course is going to be to look out for all those little like pits and pockets of mud that kind of like shapes to your like foot size, everything that's kind of pitted down, almost like you're riding bridle trails or something like that, or running bridle trails. Um, because all of that is going to be frozen over. There's not going to be a lot of like play for your foot to just kind of like sink into the ground if you like kind of step on a little pitted spot. So I think for everybody out there, like just watch your footing, even though it's you might not be running on any roots or rocks. Like try to avoid some of those pits. I was out on the trails a couple weeks ago, and there's still some leaves and whatnot in the area, so it makes like looking at like, hey, where am I stepping a little bit trickier. So although it's not going to be like whiteout conditions, like super frozen, like gnarly that way, I think it's going to have these other challenges where you're fast. You don't want to roll in.
Right, for sure. Great. Thank you for those tips because we do have a lot of people listening. I'm sure that's getting ready to run Frozen Known. So watch out for that footing and have a great race. But I've said this before, but I think it doesn't hurt to say again. We're here with Dr. Liesle Elsey, and Liesle has been a huge part of my journey with pelvic health and among other things. But that's kind of where we met and started off. And what I think is really interesting is working with her. I've learned a ton about that, but I also have become more aware of it in the community. I hear so many ladies in different Facebook groups having concerns with leaking while they're running and what are they going to do with it. And that was like one of my huge problems. And it became a bigger problem as I started running longer events, right? I mean, I could manage for so long. And then I started having a lot of issues and frustration. And so for me, it became like kind of near and dear to my heart to be able to spread the news and to share Liesle because I felt like I had this gem that other people didn't have. And now with our coaching, Liesle is seeing people right from the very beginning, and we're finding more ladies even in just in these conversations that are having those struggles. And I have partnered a little bit with Revive for Women, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But that has been really helpful for me, and I've been able to share some of that with other other ladies to try to see if that also helps with their journey. So there's just so much that I'm excited about being here today. And I'm really excited, Reese, for you to learn more, because I mean, we're working with all kinds of different athletes, and men and women both struggle with this issue. And it's not something that a lot of people like to talk about. You know, it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable. You know, I was struggling with that for so long on my own, and not really telling the people that I ran with because it was embarrassing. And you know, you're leaking and you smell, and you know, like in your kind of in the society we live, it's like, oh, it's normal for women or girls to have that issue. It's not normal, and there are things to help you. So thanks a lot, Liesle, for doing what you do and being so passionate about it and being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you. So it's been fun. So the last time we had this conversation was probably, oh gosh, it was three years ago, maybe. And I didn't have a voice. And
Yes.
so so now we're doing it over again, and we're going to be able to hear what we're saying, and just kind of start that conversation so that, and yes, women tend to be a bit more vocal about this, but this also holds true for men because they also have a pelvic floor and it might present a bit differently. So the concept of like, you know, running into the woods because you really have to go like number two, right? You still should be able to feel confident when you have to, you know, have to go to the bathroom that you can hold it. But yeah, so I started my journey. I'll give a quick recap. Like started my journey in pelvic health primarily after having children. And when I was in college, I ran and I had SI pain, and it was kind of like, oh, well, you also have a history, you dance, so you're a little bit more flexible. And so maybe that's a part of it. And then after kids, it was like, wow, what is going on? There's so much change going on. And so in PT school, when I was in PT school, it was like a 1-day class that you were given this information. And I was like, okay. And so somebody had come and said, hey, we're going to hold this course. Do you want to go? I was said, what is it? What does that mean? I was like, oh, I don't know. But I was struggling with issues of my own. And then they said, well, this can also help SI pain, like for your runners, and that diffuse hip pain and back pain. I was like, ugh, darn it all. So it goes to help support our overall like foundation for our hips to move off of, for our back, for the SI joint, which so many of us struggle with. And a portion of it can be from that pelvic floor. So not only will this conversation kind of cover some of the leaking, the pressure, the pain, but pain encompassing low back and hip and SI joint, which are super, I would say super common in just the realm of moving. And the pelvic floor is all beneath it.
Great. Well, where should we start?
Yeah. So this would be, I think the good place to start would be talking about, like, let's say the common thing of leaking. And so the question becomes, well, why is it that I'm leaking? And so if you sometimes talk to different practitioners and say, well, do your Kegels. But the thing of it is, it's not always about strength, that muscle is weak. It can be weakness. It can be because the lack of coordination. It can also be because of too much tension, or a combination of all those things. And then even the last piece is just change. And we'll talk about a little bit more of this here in a minute. Like, as women, our bodies go through so much change in our lifetime. And so some of those things we can help, and some of those things we need to find strategies to make us be able to be more efficient. So, and stop me if there's questions, because sometimes I just start to babble when I start talking about things that are like really exciting to me.
Can you tell she's excited?
So the first concept of, of tension. So I use this example for all of my patients. And so we think about the pelvic floor. And so I have Mr. Bones here. So our pelvic floor, it rests in the bottom of our pelvis like a bowl. And so its job is to provide support, but also provide stability so that my knee and my hip, all this can move, and that my spine can be stable. If because life, especially over the past, say, 3 years, has been a bit crazy, there's a lot going on, so we can like end up tucking our tails, which is like holding our pelvic floor real tight. And so we want to make sure that we can be happy puppy dogs and we can wag our tail. We need to have that pelvic floor to be open and dynamic. And so if I were standing up right now, you would see me wiggling my tail, because we need to have a dynamic pelvic floor, just like we need to have dynamic muscles throughout our whole system. So the first concept is tension. If we're just housing too much tension in our pelvic floor, because maybe the stresses of life, from anxiousness and stress, like we're just housing too much tension. Second one, we can say, okay, well, weakness, and that's pretty like straightforward. Like maybe there's some weakness in the pelvic region, and that could be just generalized weakness. That could be because of maybe disuse and you haven't told the pelvic floor to do anything. It can be in our postpartum, or I'll say prenatal postpartum realm, because that pelvic floor, its responsibility has changed, especially when we're considering like a vaginal delivery too, like those tissues stretch a lot. So in that aspect, okay, so we might have some weakness. Then thinking about, okay, well, is it just a coordination component? And so when we think about how we move, we want to make sure that the pelvic floor has the ability to turn on when it's appropriate. If we use the concept of there's too much tension, then maybe that pelvic floor can't turn on at that moment that your foot is hitting the ground. And so there'll be that little dribble as you're making contact. So thinking about like those three pieces. And then the last piece of like aging from a hormonal perspective is like, and if you've had vaginal deliveries and like the overall principles of muscle to have the elasticity and tissue, is it's not there as much. And so sometimes we start to develop some change in pressures in the pelvic region. And so maybe there's changes where that bladder is. And so now it's not as supported. So we need to really make sure that our muscular system is there to help with some of that coordination. But then there's also devices, and we'll go through that here in a little bit, that we can most certainly use to help give a little bit of support, kind of like a sports bra for like our private areas for women.
You know, Liesle, I really like that you're talking about the different things and the different causes, because I think that's really important for people to hear, because like I said, I see a lot of posts online, and there's a lot of threads and people are giving advice, but things are different for different people. So the advice that's being given may not be specific to you and what will work for you. So a classic example, I think, is one of my running friends and I both happen to see Liesle, and our situations are a little bit different. You know, I obviously am a middle-aged runner, and my friend is younger. She just had her second baby. And that's really, I mean, the great thing about running with younger people is it's a little bit more of a topic that people talk about more freely than people maybe in even my age, or maybe that's just the way I was raised. I was raised not really that we don't talk about these kind of things, but my friend opened it up for me. You know, she was starting to see a pelvic floor therapist, and we talked about it, and I was struggling. And so that gave me somebody to talk to about, which was also really awesome, but our reasons are different. So we're not being treated the same, you know? So I think that that's super important to think about.
Yeah. I mean, it's also interesting too. And that's why when I'll do an evaluation on a patient who has pelvic floor dysfunction, they'll say, well, it's probably because I'm not doing my Kegels. And it's like, well, why do you say that? It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, I was doing them religiously, but things didn't get any better. And it's like, well, okay, cool. Like, well, let's see what we need to do to help improve that. And most certainly over the course of body changes, that maybe the story changes, and it is a weakness thing, and then it becomes a coordination thing, and then it's like, oh, okay, there's more change. Like how do we adapt to that? So yeah, it's fun, and that's where I think as a pelvic floor therapist, I love it because it's so different from each person to person. It's not just like, oh, well, let's go ahead and do blank, blank, blank. Sometimes we can cluster things, but it really takes the time to like figure out like where I'm at. And it's sidebar. See, I get distracted very easily. Fatigue is another thing that falls into a place with incontinence. So our new moms who are exhausted because they're waking up every 2 hours, every 3 hours to help the newborn baby, but they have to run because it helps manage their stress. That fatigue, wherever there's the most vulnerability to that tissue or muscles rather, it's like, that's going to be a bit more glaring. So if we think like, oh, okay, like maybe my calves are weak, now I have Achilles tendonitis, but in the pelvic region, if we're exhausted and we just had a baby vaginally, like our pelvic floor is going to be like, psh, I'm out. And so as you go to run, you're like, but I need to run because I help manage my stress. It's like drip, 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 drip. And it's just, and then that's frustrating, but they're like, I have to run. So they have to find that balance. And so it becomes this struggle of like, what is it that I should do? Do I not run, or do I take care of my pelvic floor? And then they're stuck in the middle to try to figure out what to do.
Right. And, you know, I think that's a really good point too. So together, Liesle and I have been working with an athlete that has had a baby not all that long ago. And so that has been a really big, thing that's a great learning experience for me as a coach as well, is talking about that with this particular athlete and thinking about what should training look like as they develop. I mean, her goal is a 100-mile race this year, but she also just had a baby a few months ago. So how do we progress, and how do people progress their training and building in their strength and mobility, but also keeping in mind that you just had a baby a few months ago, and how had that much just changed your body? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think we have a lot of moms that they're afraid of losing their fitness during this time, and then they still want to keep big goals, but they are facing things like being stressed and tired and, you know, all of those pieces that come with being a mom anyway.
Yeah, stress and then even just think about like the poor eating habits that we might have as moms. We're like, oh, I'll just grab this protein bar. How many calories are in there? Okay, there's 8 grams of protein and 200 calories. Sweet. I'm just going to chow that down. And it's like survival. But yeah, so we think about the concepts of getting back to running. It's like, first of all, you do have to listen to your body, but that also means, you know, do I need to maybe go out for a run or a run walk just to clear my head? Because we talked about the concept of tension. If there's so much tension in that pelvic floor, you need to have a good outlet to help kind of release some of those stresses and anxiety. So if it's like hitting the pavement, okay, but we want to make sure it's not painful or minimizing how it can be symptomatic. So if you hit the ground and you're like drip, 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 drip the whole time, it's like, okay, well, maybe let's find other strategies to help keep us moving. Because when we think about also our pelvis changing positions and how our hip musculature has been put in a different position as well, then we think, okay, well, let's make sure my hips and my core, especially my abdominal muscles that feed into my pelvic floor, that they can kind of restore some of that coordination to give me a bit of support that I need, so that when I go to hit the ground, I feel good. So we think about strength training and just some core things. And it can be basic things as just breathing. So every night I say, okay, I want you to go ahead, mom, like at the end of that, you put kids to bed. I want you to lay in bed. I want you to visualize. I'm going to take that nice big breath in as I breathe in. So I'm going to grab Mr. Bones here again. As I breathe in, we have our diaphragm all the way up top through here. Pelvic floor sits on the bottom. As I take a breath in, my diaphragm's dropping down and my lungs are filling up. So we kind of know that like, okay, my lungs fill up with air. Diaphragm's going to drop down. Because that diaphragm drops down, it adds pressure into the pelvic bowl and puts a bit of pressure to the pelvic floor to say, hey, I'm going to have you stretch a bit. Because of elastic principle, anything that stretches is going to recoil. So we can start to reestablish this coordination postpartum of diaphragm pelvic floor, that if I'm breathing, which we all should be breathing, like that diaphragm pelvic floor should be connected. And sometimes, especially if baby's like up in that ribs, that we want to restore that coordination, because sometimes that gets lost from not having a vaginal delivery. If we've had a C-section, restoring the ability of still that connection of diaphragm pelvic floor, but also the abdominal muscles, because having that incision there, it's painful. And so for those who've had C-sections or any type of abdominal procedure, they will be the first to tell you that like the first 2 weeks are rough, and now you're surviving as a mom. So working on some of that breathing to restore that coordination in the first stages of postpartum, but then seeing, can I have a bit of, knee strength, like quad strength, gastroc strength, hip strength, to make sure that I can shock absorb appropriately. Does that all make sense? Does that all make sense?
It does. And I want to kind of like expand that a little bit. Another type of athlete we're working with just had a hysterectomy. So I think she's kind of dealing with some of the same things in a different manner. So, you know, there's just so many things that can happen that can make changes, I think, with our pelvic floor. Again, Liesle has been supporting her and me, and we're working together to work on strength and getting her back going as well. But so many great reasons to see a pelvic floor physical therapist. But when we were talking about that diet, that breathing, is that when you're talking about diaphragmatic breathing and what we have on our page?
Yeah, yep. So if you go on to the trailrun.com, right? That's right.
Coach. Coach. Yep.
So if you look at the diaphragmatic breathing, it's going to kind of walk you through it. And that's exactly what we want to try to reconnect that from. And it's interesting that you brought up our post-hysterectomy patients, because we can have a hysterectomy for a variety of reasons. But she was the first thing that she said, she's like, "Oh, I don't breathe." I was like, "Yes, I do need you to breathe," because she was doing her strength stuff, and her strategy to have stability in her system was just to hold her breath, as so often many of us do. It's like, and we like release that pressure. But we have to keep this pressure system moving, and we can use breath to help kind of release the pressure, so that pressure here, this is courtesy of Intimate Rose, so, and I'll bring it real close, so that pressure doesn't go down. And that's what happens. Like, we're going to have that pressure that gets stuck downward. And so for those of you who are just listening, if you go on and watch this later, you'll see my demonstration. But so if we think about,
for Reese.
there you go, Reese, so you can understand. And same thing happens for our gentlemen, is like that pressure is going to go someplace. And so that can give you the urge to go to the bathroom, whether it's to pee or poo, but it's going to happen. But we want to make sure that if we hold our breath, we're holding our breath. And so that pressure has to release someplace, because you just closed off the epiglottis up at the throat. So you're not going to release pressure that way. So it's going to go blank that way.
That's a very, very great visual. So if you're not watching right now and you're just listening, you might want to check out our YouTube channel, because she just demonstrated with a great visual as well. And bringing that up, I think, is really good. So I understand strength training and breathing and all of that piece, but I realized how much more important it was when I started having conversations with you about pelvic floor, and realizing, how important that breathing piece is.
Yeah, and it's funny because like if you watch young kids breathe, you can see that they have like this beautiful, nice, like wavy motion. And then as we age, we just compensate in other ways. And so if we're asthmatic, we tend to breathe a bit higher. And so maybe we're not ever getting input down through the diaphragm into the pelvic region. So maybe if we're asthmatic, we have chronic low back pain, or we have that hip pain that's fairly persistent. If we are anxious, again, a safety net is just to come up here. But we know that if we have anxiousness, we want to be able to take that deep breath to pull on like that vagus nerve to say, whew, we're gonna be okay. But yeah, so the breathing, it's so simple, but it can be so effective just starting it today. I mean, right, it's the first year we make New Year's resolutions. Like, maybe the New Year's resolution for everybody who is listening or watching is, before you go to bed, I want you to take nice 10 deep breaths and see like, what is it that my body does? Because it can be just so like restorative.
Nice. Okay, Reese, you've been really quiet. I'm just gonna gonna call you out here and say, like, as a male coach, are you getting females talking with you about this? Is this something that they're open with, or not something that's really something that's a topic of discussion?
So currently I'm working with one female, and she hasn't brought it up as a topic of discussion, but through my community that I run with, friends with a lot of girls, and I hear it multiple, just in passing from them, whether they come up to me directly, whatever it is. So like, I know that there's leakage issues. There's, is it called incontinence issues too? Like, say when you're running and you have a hard time like holding back the urge.
You're leaking, yeah. So that can be fecal or bladder. So so like a lot of times people will be like, oh, gotta get to the bathroom real fast, because they just can't hold it in.
I've done a really great job at like describing like what this pelvic floor is, because to me it kind of like, whenever I talk with people about a pelvic floor, it seems to be like this like nebulous concept. And I guess for anybody like listening, you can almost like imagine your cup like this. On the front side of your cup, we have your abdominals, your transversus abdominis, some of your obliques that wrap around the side, maybe your QL in the back, some spinal erectors that kind of compose this 3D trunk that supports your body. But then we also have the top of that cup, the lid, which is going to be your diaphragm. And I love that you mentioned that, because a lot of people don't think of the diaphragm as anything other than just the muscle that helps you breathe, with which most of us, I would say, are not using on a daily basis. And I see this all the time working at the clinic. We have to try to get people into particular positions to force them to use that abdominal or their diaphragm instead of using their chest to breathe. But then, of course, we have the bottom of our cup, and that is the pelvic floor. And when we think about this 3D trunk, of course, we want to have strong abs. We want to have strong obliques. We want to have strong back muscles to support the pelvis and support the rib cage and everything that's above it, everything that you're trying to move forwards. But a lot of times this bottom of the cup that's important is not being addressed. And I think that's kind of the great topic of discussion right now is, hey, yeah, like let's get strong abdominals, but also let's support that 3D trunk structure. And I do love that you mentioned the breathing piece. And I would go and challenge anybody to lie down on the ground, press your low back into the floor, put one hand on your chest, one hand on your stomach, and try to only breathe by elevating and depressing your stomach and not letting your chest move whatsoever. I would wager that 8 out of 10 people are going to breathe through their chest first instead of through their abdominals. This is something that yogis preach all the time, and it's something that's like critical to the practice, is getting reconnected with that diaphragm. It's the chief respiration muscle. So I mean, if that thing isn't working, we're going to be, taxing all of these other muscles that we're using to breathe, little neck muscles that can do the job but don't necessarily want to do the job. So I mean, like, in regards to the pelvic floor, like the diaphragm is critical, but in regards to just everything and endurance principles, like endurance runners, that's half of the battle, is just making sure that we can breathe the entire time. And there's something that I really like to tell people, and that's like, like breathe ugly almost. Like we have this societal expectation that our stomachs need to be like small and trim and toned the entire time. And like if you go watching Tour de France cyclists, they're bent over, they're breathing through their diaphragm. For a split second, it looks like they have a baby in their belly because they are breathing so hard through their stomach in order to help them with their endurance effort. So I think, like regardless of the pelvic floor, just get in touch with that breathing to that top part of your 3D trunk. And to hear that is actually going to help us re-engage and reincorporate the bottom of our trunk is just even more reason to keep practicing that, especially on like easy runs where you're just going out and your mind is kind of wandering, whatever. Like try to like build in this habit of like, okay, for the next 5 minutes during this easy run, like I'm going to see if I can really just breathe nice and deep through my belly, expand and contract that belly. I love that. And I do love too that, you're bringing attention to this idea that like as new mothers, like, like y'all do need to like go see a specialist or go like learn these principles, because a lot of times it's not just as simple as just like, hey, getting back up there and doing your strength training, because like you said before, you can either have a weak muscle, and that's the cause of not being able to hold things back or incontinence issues, or you can have a connection issue between your brain and actually using that muscle at the correct time. It's the same reason why like bodybuilders, like sure, they have these big muscles, but they can't run the fastest because they're not coordinated the running gait, right? So like it's the same reason why, like all of us with muscles can't just go out on a skateboard and do a kickflip. Like we don't have that neural connection. So sometimes after having a baby, which babies are miracles, they're great, but as far as like what it does to your body, it's kind of a traumatic event, So like after any trauma, like just spending a couple weeks and touching back up on these things that we think like, oh, I know how to breathe, or like, oh, I know how to squeeze my pelvic floor, or whatever it is, getting in contact, having somebody look at you and assess like, hey, are all systems firing, so that when you do get back to your performance, you already have one step above because you're connected to your 3D trunk instead of just thinking like, oh, I can Kegel, I got this, or oh, I know how to breathe, it's easy, I do it all the time, a couple thousand times a day, actually, So there's more efficient ways to do things, and there's less efficient ways to do things. And I think like this is a great conversation that I'm thoroughly enjoying. So I'm going to step back out of the way. I've spoken enough already. We were talking about new mothers and like breathing, and let's continue that train of thought is like, now putting these concepts that we've been talking about into practice. Like you mentioned, somebody like tonight, today, whatever it is, if you got 5 minutes, get on the floor, do some deep breathing. But what are some other things that we can do as athletes to help set us up for better breathing, for better pelvic floor? What are some actionables that we could take away?
So the other position that I love putting individuals in to kind of reconnect with that diaphragm, because the other thing that we have to remember is with that diaphragm. So Risa said like so but it's all the way around too. So it's not just through like the top front, like here, but even it goes down as low as our low back. And so a lot of times, especially if we have like a sit down job, which I would venture to say like a lot of us do, like our thoracic spine gets a bit stiff. So thoracic spine is like our upper back. So I like putting people in a child's pose position or even just laying on their belly, because now as they go to try to take that belly breath, it can't go this way. It can't go this way because you're laying on your stomach. But where that pressure can go is right down into that pelvic system. And so it's a nice way to tell the back part of that diaphragm to work, as well as that low pelvic region, like, hey, like, I need you to be able to work. So sometimes getting into child's pose is lovely. So if you don't know what child's pose is, I think I can show you real fast because it's pretty simple, right? So getting into this position and coming on down. And so by being in this position, it just blocks it blocks that stomach, but it's still going to kind of, that pressure as that air fills in, because you're blocking through here, is going to like really send it down into the pelvic bowl. So that'll be like one actionable item. Even knowing how to activate your pelvic floor and there's a variety of ways to activate it for depending on what it is that you're looking for. So for instance, and this is male, female, so we'll kind of do a both combination here just to give equal opportunity for individuals to try this. So sitting still, if you were to activate your pelvic floor, nobody should necessarily see that you're doing it. So like if I'm squeezing my pelvic floor, I did not go like this and rise up and down. I was not engaging my glutes. So a lot of times people will engage their glutes to try to get pelvic floor. Though the glute muscles can help with the pelvic floor, that is not just a pelvic floor contraction. So the first cue that we can say is like, okay, if we had to, we felt like we were going to pass gas, and it's not appropriate to pass gas in front of us, in front of individuals, like you're going to use those muscles to keep that gas in. And so that'll be a bit more backsided. So when we think about keeping gas in, or we have that urge to have a bowel movement where we're going to try to keep that up and in. Then if we're thinking, okay, well, that's a bit more backsided. So we have our posterior triangle for fecal incontinence. Then we have that front triangle for women. We think about a urogenital triangle. And for men, it's still the same structure. We just have a little bit of a longer hose, if you will. So what we're going to do is we're going to think, okay, I want you to, if we're thinking about trying to get the front triangle, so warning, I'm going to be using graphic words. So we're going to think about trying to nod that clitoris down. And so we're going to be doing this type of motion. So it's going to be a little guy. And so a lot of times I'll give that cue and I'll be like, wait, what do you want me to do? I'm like, just like a nod, like, hey, how you doing? And so they'll try to be like, yeah, perfect. And it's just a small motion. So we can use that for contracting the front part of our pelvic floor. For men, we can say, okay, I want you to go ahead and I want you to retract your penis. And so when we think about like, just visualizing, if we had to like bring it in, that's how we would be able to achieve that activation. Now we can combine all of those things and say, okay, we're going to do front and back. And so now we're going to get the whole collective pelvic floor and say, okay, like, sweet, I can in fact do that. But then we can add the breath to it. And so now we're kind of exaggerating both aspects. Is like we take that breath in, pelvic floor lengthens. As we breathe out, it's going to come back up because of its natural like elastic principles. It's stretched, so it's going to come back up. And now you're going to give it an extra squeeze to get that support. And then if we say, well, let's go ahead and we want to gently, just very, very gently engage those core muscles. And so we could say belly button to spine. And so now we're going to do all three things. Is we're going to go ahead and engage, take that breath in, pelvic floor opens. As we breathe out, we're going to squeeze that pelvic floor, draw that belly button up and in. And so now we have this system that can go open and close. And we want to be able to do both things. So whether you have tension or weakness, you want to make sure that it can in fact do both. It can open and close. When I first started practicing, I was like, oh, we have a lot of tension there. We need to focus on opening, yoga, open, open, open. But then I never told them that they had to be strong with that new length. And so it was like, well, I learned that real fast, like, darn it, because their symptoms evolve from being, oh, I have pain, to now I feel pressure and or I have more like leaking with it. And it's like, ooh, okay, well, let's try this. And so we reassessed. It's like, okay, well, now let's go ahead and work on open, like you've been doing great job. Now I want you to go ahead and close. So actionable items. I know I get sidetracked so easily here. Making sure that we know how to activate our pelvic floor. We know how to find our pelvic floor. Other things to consider is our shock absorbing system. So if we were to take our shoes off and run down the street, we would move in a much different fashion because we wouldn't want to hurt our feet on the pavement, right? Now, if we put our shoes back on, we would move differently as well. But we can think that, okay, well, if I'm barefooted, I'm going to try to like shock absorb a bit more so that I'm not having as much force through that system. Same thing for the pelvic floor. We want to make sure that if we were to visualize that if I am a spring and I can move up and down, I want to make sure that my ankle, my knee, my hip can shock absorb so that by the time those forces get up into the pelvic region, that bladder isn't just smashing down into the pelvic bowl. And so I always say it's kind of like a water balloon toss. If I were to toss Reese the water balloon, he would cradle it and he'd be like, whoa, that was close. I didn't want that balloon to like pop. But if he were just to stand there and not like cradle that water balloon, it would probably just all over the place. And so we want to make sure that we have two things: the mobility in the ankle, the knee, the hip, but as well as the strength in that whole lower chain to be able to set you up for success. So another actionable item is like, well, what does my mobility look like? Can I have good ankle dorsiflexion? So here's like my ankle, dude. And so it's like, okay, can my foot, so here's my foot. Let me take this backside up. Can I actually have my tibia, my shin bone, can it come forward a far amount distance before my heel maybe wants to rise up? So if I go to do a squat, can I get this type of motion? And sometimes like, ooh, wow, my calf is really tight, or my it's like, okay, well, let's see, is it your gastroc that attaches above the knee, or is it that soleus muscle that attaches like midway? So like here's our soleus is going to attach here, gastroc is going to attach way up here. So it's like, okay, can I squat down, Mr. Bones here? Can I in fact squat down? Let's get both knees doing. Oh, sorry guys, he's not wanting to squat for me.
I think I've seen a few people squat like that.
So we can see that Mr. Bones here is going to squat on down, and he has the mobility in his ankle, his knees, and his hips to be able to get in that position. And so we want to make sure like, sweet, we can absolutely do that. And then we can come back up. And then we think about propulsion. It's like, well, is my calf able to do that to help give me that push? And can my glute help with some of that? And if the answer is no, then we know, okay, we need to work on some of those strength pieces. So actionable items, knowing, can we activate it? Do I know how to activate my pelvic floor? It's like question mark. We've already talked about the breath before that. What does my mobility look like from, from bottom up, my ankle, my knee, my hip? And then what does the strength look like? And some of that can be just a quick, like, okay, can I go up and down on my toes? Can I do a squat? Can I do a single leg squat? Can I stand on one leg? And if it's like, whoa, I'm so wobbly, newsflash, like running is a single leg activity. So you have to be good in single limb. So I think those, like we'll say 4 things: breathing, knowing how to find that pelvic floor, working on mobility and strength, like we need to find all those pieces to make sure that we're feeling confident so that we can be as efficient without having any type of symptoms, be it the leakage and incontinence, pain. We don't want to do those. We don't want to have that. We just want to be able to run carefree and frolic, right? So that's a long answer to your question, Reese, or statement.
No, I feel like, that's always the first thing, is to get people in these positions that make it really hard for them to do things wrong. So that way they can feel what they need to do to feel things right, So that would be like your child's pose and your deep breathing, just to make sure that, like, hey, you're feeling, what does it feel like to actually breathe with your diaphragm and send a little bit of pressure into your pelvic floor. And it's funny because for anybody that's watching this, you probably couldn't tell, but I was actually following along as you were doing these things, right? So I was doing some deep breathing and I was like, yeah, I feel I notice a little bit of pressure in my pelvic floor. And if I do that pelvic floor squeeze, and I'm squeezing the front, retracting the genitals, like retracting the anus, like getting all of that situated, to take a very deep breath is really tough, because I can feel that, hey, there's just, the pressure is just not wanting to go anywhere, So you can kind of feel along and feel, okay, what does it feel like when I'm deep breathing and I'm putting a little pressure in my pelvic floor? What happens if I squeeze that pelvic floor and also try to do the same deep pressure breath? And once you can start to play around with that, then that, like, hey, like, you're building that connection, or that ability to, like, utilize your brain and say, I want to activate this and not this, or this and not this. And once you have control over it, now the next piece is to build that connection into more dynamic movements, right? And I think that's something that can be built up through, like you were mentioning, single leg squatting, single leg balancing. Maybe you just balance on one foot and you try the same thing. You try to activate your pelvic floor, and then you try to do some deep breathing and then activate your pelvic floor and try to, like, support your entire trunk. Maybe your single leg stance, you are retracting your pelvic floor, you're drawing your belly button inwards, and then you're practicing creating some tension and keeping that tension, keeping everything stiff while still breathing through that diaphragm. And then you can take that, and that's like a dynamic movement, right? Like, that's something that's functional, but you can add another level of complexity to that, and more dynamics, and actually have like a running gait while you do it. Now you've built this connection between your brain and how to use those muscles in, like a somewhat controlled environment of the gym, where you're able to really think about what's going on. And then you add some more variables, like taking it out on a run. And those extra variables, like, we all think, like, oh, we go running all the time, like there's not a lot of variability to it. But you got to think, every time your foot strikes, every time your foot, like, lands, maybe you're dodging a little something, maybe your attention is being distracted from here to there to whatever, maybe you're going uphill, maybe you're going downhill, maybe you're banking left or banking right, trying to swerve out of traffic. There's a lot of things that, like, kind of distract us from not engaging that pelvic floor. So now, if you can build in these intervals on your easy runs, maybe you build in these intervals of, like, connecting, like, hey, for the next 3 minutes, like, I'm really going to connect with my pelvic floor and with my breathing and see what that feels like. We take these conscious efforts and we start to try to make them unconscious. So now, with all of these variables given at us when we're running, whether it's trees, roots, rocks, trails, navigating, we build this autonomic engagement, this automatic process of engaging those pelvic floor muscles and that 3D trunk and that good breathing. And then you no longer have to think about it. This is just a part of how you move. So it's kind of a great, like, stepwise progression that you kind of laid out for us, is engage that pelvic floor first, and then try to engage it while you're doing a little bit more gym work, and then try to engage it while you're doing more dynamic running. Or, you can even do this on the stationary bike if you're out biking, things like that. So I think it's a great stepwise progression and actionable list for people to do at home right now,
Yeah. And the other one that's fun to do is working on jumping. So I think when we had chatted last time when I was a guest here, is we talked about, like, jumping things like box drops, and we can incorporate breath work with those tasks to help make sure that, because the one thing that we do know is, even we can use talking or humming. I prefer humming or shushing, like shh, because it's a way to get sound out without and we know that we're breathing, and so we have that connection without thinking pelvic floor turn on, I'm saying, hey, I'm going to say something. And by way of saying something, I know that the diaphragm is coming up because air is going out. And so if we're using, assuming that I'm just using a normal breath talk, we know that there's not pressure that's going to get lost unless I were to say like, ah, and hold it as long as I could. And at the end, I start to drop off and now pressure changes to help get that air out. But we can use talking, humming, to help with that too. So if we think about as we're jumping and we land, we're going to go hum as we're landing, and that we know that if we're humming, and so we use the principle of eccentric activation here, is because if I hum, there is going to be a controlled manner that the air is getting out of my system and creating sound. And so if I'm doing a calculated sound, I know how long I want it to be, then my brain has to know I need to be able to get this sentence out, and it's going to have to control that pressure so that I can finish my sentence. And so if we use the same principle when we go to jump, now we're not thinking pelvic floor, hey, do something, but we're like, and so pelvic floor, if I'm going to come here, we can say, as I'm landing down like a box drop, so on a step and just kind of dropping down, we can go, because we're controlling the air, and now that pelvic floor is going to have to work eccentrically because you're dropping down to the ground. So that's another way for individuals getting back into running, is to work on some in-space jumping with some of that breath work. And so again, like we said, it's a calculated, like, you know, that it's a controlled environment. Like, I'm going to jump, I'm going to hop over this hurdle, I'm going to hop to 12 o'clock, to 3 o'clock, to 9 o'clock, to 6 o'clock. And now I'm going to do that. I'm going to do both feet. I'm going to do single foot. Now I'm going to alternate feet and just change it up. So the consideration of trails and so this weekend, you'll be able to utilize all of this, Reese, because the ground's going to be uneven, and you want to make sure and I think a lot of us, when we hit an uneven spot, we might say, oh, and make sure that we don't fall. But now we'll be able to have like that connection of our pelvic floor to be like, whoa, man, I got you. Nothing's gonna happen there. So yeah, some fun things that we can do. Now, in the event, I want to make sure that I say this now so I don't forget. In the event that we've worked on our pelvic floor strength, our coordination, we've done all of that, and now we're like, now what do I do? I still have leaking. There are things that women can utilize. And so one of them, and Loretta had talked about this earlier, is a product called Revive. So I'm going to show you here. This is Revive. And so this is a product that you can purchase over the counter online. And it is, it gets put into this little applicator, and as such, and then similar to using a tampon, you can go ahead and insert it. So it's in the applicator and you insert it. Boop, this thing goes into that vaginal canal. This top guy is going to go against that bladder. This piece here, this tip here, is going to be pressing against the urethra. So it's going to be high up into that pelvic bowl, and it provides just that little bit of support so that it can help improve some of the leaking that may happen. So that's something that works, that you can purchase, but women can purchase easily. And I believe Loretta has a code for it,
I do. So actually, I use that product quite frequently. It has really changed my life for running. When I use it, I don't have any leaking. I actually forget that it's actually, after I insert it, I forget that it's there sometimes. So it's been super helpful. I have offered it and shared it with some other ladies too, who have, also found success with it. But the code is 10 ultra crazy. So if you want to try it and get a discount, you can put in 10 ultra crazy and go to Amazon and it's Revive for women.
Yes. So and the nice thing about it too is, so we're talking about just changes in, as we age, and our tissue isn't as, plump as it used to be, because as women, our estrogen starts to take a dive when we get to menopause. And so sometimes, we don't have as much support there. So we need to have that little, like, we'll say vaginal sports bra, if you will, to help hold that bladder up in that position. If you see a gynecologist, urogynecologist, so gynecologist, urologist, urogynecologist, they can fit you for something that's a bit more bulkier, which is a pessary, and that gives you the support. And it can come in and out just as Revive can, but it's going to be a bit more thicker of a material. So it's going to be a thicker silicone that can be put in and out. And again, some women will utilize this just for activity because they just need that little bit of support. It does not take away the function of what the muscles need to do. So just because you have Revive in, you have a pessary in, does not mean that you don't have to think about like connecting with your pelvic floor, because you still need to, because if you don't, then this device will still rub against the tissues and can create breakdown. So just to remember, and for those listening, if you are a female who does have a pessary in, still work on that connection with the pelvic floor, because those muscles will be happy to have that little bit of support so that they can do their job. So I think that that's like Revive is super awesome because the muscles can do what they want. A lot of times women will sometimes find that when they're on their period, they have a tampon in, it's helpful. Or if they have a cup. So here's our menstrual cup. For those of you who don't know, menstrual cup. It can give the same support up at the bladder or maybe down at the colon. And so we can think like, okay, well, if I put a cup in, like, how does that help improve my dynamics? Because maybe my bladder isn't dropping down all the time. And so that provides just a little bit of support in the event that we've kind of exhausted everything. It's like, okay, well, let's try that as far as conservative. And then sometimes if you see your urogynecologist, urologist, is that they can do injections into the urethra. So one of the products on the market is a Bulkamid. And so it's like a bulking agent for the urethra. And so it helps bulk up that tissue where that urine comes out, so that you have a bit more fullness to the tissue. So when you go to pull, it's like the thickness of it, you don't need as much force to kind of squeeze down. That's how I visualize it. And then there's the options of having different surgical interventions. At the end of the day, whether you decide to have surgery or decide not to have surgery, decide to use a pessary, decide not to, you still have to work on the muscles at the end of the day. So even if you are like, yes, I need to see a pelvic floor therapist, by all means, it's still going to be a wonderful experience, because you still have to connect with your muscles, because they having those things do not change the muscle's ability to contract. I mean, it may a little bit, in the sense that it's not feel like it's having to hold up the world all day long. But the muscles still have to know that they need to be dynamic, and that they can be open, and that they can be closed as well. So I wanted to make sure that I just chat about the things that for women that you can use still as conservative management prior to going into some type of surgical options. So I think that's like trying to make sure if that was everything. Yeah, that's pretty good.
So I'll add to that. So why I said I use the Revive, I also, by working on my pelvic floor health, which included mobility and strength, all of those components, I made huge progress, and I can run without one. Where when I first met Liesle, I could go maybe 5 minutes without leaking. And I built up to being able to go for several miles without leaking. But sometimes I do it just as a security net. So it's nice for me to have if I'm running with friends, or if I'm in an event, so I don't have to think about it. I will use it, because I just don't trust that it won't happen. And as we know, as runners, if that starts happening, it causes chafing and all kinds of other problems. So for me, that's just kind of my security blanket, I guess. But definitely have worked on all of those other pieces. And through the things that Liesle has suggested, I've made huge improvement. So.
Yeah. I mean, and it's also like, it's kind of like, well, what sports bra am I going to wear today? Am I going to wear like my SheFit sports bra that like really like holds the girls high and tight? Or am I going to wear like my sports bra that's like 10 years old and I maybe have to double up? So depending on how far you're going, sometimes it's nice to put that little support there to hold everything where it needs to be, and then be able to just have a carefree run. So it's fun, because pelvic floor is you have to think about all these things, and they're totally actionable. You can totally do it. And I am happy to answer any question that anybody has, because I think knowledge is power. And so just knowing that this exists is huge, because like when I was in PD school, it was 1-day class, and it was kind of like, okay. And now there's much more conversation about it. And I would say, venture say, most of us pelvic floor therapists out there want to help you. It's like, if we could save the world, we would, but we just don't have enough time.
Great. So I think my advice to you is talk about it. Don't live in shame of maybe leaking while you run. It's no fun. It feels bad. You start smelling, you're embarrassed. You know, I couldn't even run across a parking lot. You know, I would feel like I was going to have an issue. So, you know, reach out, ask. Here at Ornery Mule Coaching, we have Liesle as part of our team, and when you start coaching with us, the first thing is an initial evaluation, and she does have conversation about that. So if you're here in Michigan, she actually sees people in person. Otherwise, there's pelvic floor therapists out there that can help you. Liesle even probably can help you get connected with somebody that may be in your area. So please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to me, Loretta.ornerymulecoaching at gmail.com. No, I'm sorry, Loretta.ornerymule racing@gmail.com, and I can get you hooked up with Liesle. But just don't, you're not alone. Lots and lots of people are suffering from this issue, but it's not something that you have to live with for your whole life. You know, I go back to, I wish I had this knowledge several years ago when I was coaching middle school, high school athletes. You know, I had girls that were having this issue and they just thought they had to live with it. And I didn't know any different. You know, I mean, I didn't tell them they had to live with it, but I didn't know that there were things that they could do to make it better for them. And, you know, that's starting so young, middle school, high school, already having issues and not having the tools to know what to do to make it better. So thank you for sharing this.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I go back to college, and one of my teammates had said, "Oh, man, I need to go change." I was like, "Why?" It's like, "Well, I peed myself. I ran so fast, I peed myself." I was like, "What?" And I was like, in my mind, I was like, "Well, I never pee myself. Maybe I'm not running fast enough." Like, and then it just was kind of like, well, yeah. And then another goes, "Oh, well, yeah, when I have a really good race, I pee myself too." And I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, okay. But like, we should start the conversation and be supportive, and have strategies in place so that we can feel confident and dry.
For sure. For sure. Anything else that you want to add, either Reese or Liesle, before we wrap up today?
Good. I just want to say thank you. I think even just bringing this conversation kind of destigmatizes the, you know, the taboo nature of like talking about like, you know, the down under muscles. But at the same time too, like critically important. And for all the listeners out there, like it may be weird to you, but to practitioners like us, like it's not weird. Like this is stuff that we talk about. I remember in my nutritional studies class, it's like most of our talk is poop talk. Most of physiology gonna be like those weird things that people don't want to talk about because you know people are engaged with like, oh, I want to grow my quads, my glutes, my hamstrings, like all these, and it's like, yeah, we have plenty of other muscles that are going to aid in performance that may have like this weird stigma around them. But if it's weird to you, it's not weird to us. So if you have questions, like go to one of these two ladies. You can come to me, but I'm going to refer you back to them. Just keep the conversation going because like as performance artists, we want to help you like get the most performance out of yourself while remaining as comfortable as you can, because endurance sports are going to be naturally uncomfortable. So we can just take away some of those like uncomfortability pieces. Huge wins.
Yeah.
Thank you, Reese.
Thank you guys for having me on. I mean, it's always a privilege to be able to talk about this conversation, and just educate and let people know that we exist. I tell all my patients, I'm a resource. If it's 2 months, 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 years, I'm always here to be a resource. So ask a question because we want to help. We want to help you. So like I said, you can reach out to me, or you can send you can sign up with coaching, and then we get to chat for part of our consult just to get all those kinks out so that you can be as fast as you can be in 2024. So thank you guys for having me again.
Yeah. And one last thing I want to share is that Liesle and I are working to put together a group for ladies only, and it's called Babes, Buckles, Blazes, and Bits. So you can learn more about this whole part of pelvic health. You can learn about training, running, strength, mobility, all of those pieces that are going to keep you healthy and ready to go in 2024. So if you're interested in that, certainly reach out to me for that too. That's something that will be some live conversations throughout the week and a training plan to take you through I'm losing thought. How many weeks? For 6 weeks. So it's a 6-week package. So yeah, so reach out. But I just kind of want to wrap this all up with, so we know now that we can think about when we're having these kind of issues, start thinking about factors like sleep, hydration, stress. Those are things that can be a part of this as well. And then start thinking about your mobility and your strength. If you need support, there's people out there. Find a physical therapist that specializes in pelvic floor health, and we can help you too. So thanks again. It was great having a conversation, and it was great to be back. So Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Bye-bye.
Bye.